All right, we are live. We are live. It's been a minute. My man Rohan with me. We're going to kind of talk about 49ers offseason. There's not a lot going on, but we figured we'd hop on here, drop a little intro, and we'll get right to it. What is up, Rohan, man? How have you been? Welcome to the offseason. It's summer. I'm excited because that means football is just around the corner. We got like a month and a half until some training camp action, and then after that, we're down to the nitty gritty. So, how have you been? How you doing? How are you excited? What's going on, my man?
Hey man, I mean it's been a fun summer so far. Obviously, we're getting into it with the 49ers, and I mean there's a lot of talk always around the 49ers, and so for us, we're trying to figure out something to do. But hey, it's been a good time, and excited to top shop with you right now.
Yeah, me too, man. Like you said, not much going on, but we can always look forward to next training camps. And I think that's kind of what the vibe of tonight's show is what are we going to look forward to? Obviously, there's the quarterback battle, but that's been dragged in the mud so many times. So today, I think Rohan and I want to kind of highlight some of the big position battles, any stories that have kind of been leading up into the last a couple of weeks to kind of recap. So I'm going to kind of kick this off with the Debo Samuel, man. Obviously, he's been kind of trending on the timeline a lot. This guy's locked in. Last year he basically said a couple of weeks ago that he felt like his performance what last year was awful. He looked at the film with Kyle Shanahan and he says he was sluggish. He just wasn't happy with what he put on tape, and he rightfully shouldn't be. The year before 2021, amazing season. We've seen all the highlights and everything. You're just like, wow, got him paid. Obviously, last year, he was kind of distracted, and he said, he was looking into getting paid, didn't want to get hurt, so he didn't really train as hard. This offseason, you can just see that focus. But not only that, you got a guy named Brandon Ayuk just right by him that's ready to get paid himself. So I don't know. I'm super excited about these receivers. I feel like Debo, he knew he was like on the cusp of becoming a superstar. I don't want to say he took like a step back, but I think he wants to be back at that superstar status. I don't know. How do you feel about the wide receiver um, going into the training camp situation? Because there's a lot of other good wide receivers, a lot of young talent. Got a guy like Juwan Jennings who's also budding, and he's in a contract year. You expect him to kind of come in firing. He's been on the team for a few years, and then again, Debo, man, like he was the catalyst to this offense. Can he become that catalyst again? And what do you expect out of this group?
This is a very interesting question. Not only because of the stuff about Debo Samuel, right? Him talking about him being awful. First, I'll start with that. I mean, I like the accountability because if we're being honest, Debo Samuel was not good last year according to his expectations. He had a down year. And when I did my film reviews every week, I'd point out there are some plays where it was clear his effort level wasn't as high. And it's more so in the plays where he isn't getting the ball. When Debo Samuel has the ball in his hands, we know what Debo Samuel can do. That's unquestioned. You know that Debo Samuel's able to bring it when he's got the ball in his hands. But that effort level had to be there 100%. And I think it really started in the offseason, right? When you talk about the offseason and how that went along, Debo Samuel, unfortunately, he wasn't there because he was doing his thing in Florida with the contract negotiations, a trade discussion, and he comes into camp out of shape, alters the beginning of that season for Debo Samuel. I'm sure the significant amount of quarterback changes didn't help. Got injured a little bit, but should be averaging over 600 yards per season, more than 600 yards. He got 632 last year. You paid him $28 million or $25 million, whatever it may be. You're expecting a little more than that, and it's cool to see him take accountability. And right now, it seems like he's motivated. There at minicamp, he's ready. He looks in shape. And I'm excited to see what Debo Samuel is able to provide for the 49ers in 2023 and what likely is a crucial year because of the point you brought up with Brandon Ayuk also looking for a contract.
Yeah, no, 100%. You got Brandon Ayuk. Like everybody's talking him up. They talked him up last year. He had his best season, 1,000 yard receiving year. He's primed to become like a top 10 wide receiver, maybe top five, like Diamond Lenore. Debo said, "Well, you can't even cover this guy in a phone booth. That's ridiculous." The route running is amazing. We've seen his physical transformation. Physically, just looks so big and menacing now. I mean, this guy. I don't know, man. Like I was talking to Larry about this earlier, Larry Kruger, and he asked me straight up. He goes, "If you could, keep only one of them, Debo and Ayuk, who do you keep?" And as much as I love Debo, as much as he's kind of that tone setter, and as much as he's like the embodiment of 49ers wide receivers, the yak guy, the physical, just in your mouth type guy, Brandon Ayuk, man, you put him on any other team, he's going to get you at least 1,500 yards, maybe 10, 12 touchdowns. Like this guy is a special bona fide wide receiver one anywhere else in the league. With the 49ers, they're a run first team, but it's kind of a good problem to have. I feel if Debo can become Debo again, or that 2021 version of Debo, and like you said, a little bit more than 600 yards, if you can get 1,000 yards, squeeze something like that out of him with Brandon Ayuk, this might be the best wide receiver duo in the league. It's the most versatile wide receiver duo in the league. But I feel like these two, they'd be like a Pro Bowl pair of receivers. I don't know. I'm excited. What are your expectations on Brandon Ayuk, man?
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the two of them, and this is why I'm very intrigued because they've got a special relationship.
Yeah.
They've been together really for the majority of their careers. Samuel, obviously, 1 year ahead of Brandon Ayuk, but they've been together. They've been that 1-2 punch for the 49ers. And in a way, both of them, the 49ers need both of them to be at their best this year. But it's also in this symbiotic relationship, a little bit of a competition in 2023, understanding that, yeah, the 49ers might not be able to keep both receivers for the foreseeable future. And so that might mean the bigger performer might be the guy moving forward between Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel. I've hinted at it before, and my thoughts are with you right now. I think that if you were to keep one guy, it's going to be Brandon Ayuk. His play level is a little more sustainable. I think you can get him on a fairly solid contract, and I think that he embodies a little better, as at least as specifically as a receiver, what the 49ers would require. He's a little more reliable, and he's also fairly healthy for the most part. And so I think overall, I like what you're saying about Brandon Ayuk, and I think that this season especially seems like he's the most motivated. He's taken a year by year step. Obviously, a little bit of hampered in year two when he was in the doghouse for a little bit, and all that kind of stuff. I've had my thoughts on it. Don't necessarily, there were differences in Brandon Ayuk's play. I didn't think his play was up to par to begin year two. I thought that there were certain things with his route running, really with the entirety of his game that needed improvement, and he certainly improved to end the year after the first 7 weeks or so. And so on top of that, now you have a strong year three last season, and now going into year four, he's as motivated as ever. And I mean, you're not going to get in the way between that guy and his money. That's what I'm sensing. So I'm expecting another 1,000 yard season, and I would not be surprised one bit at all if he's the top receiver for the 49ers this year in terms of receiving yards. In fact, I actually expect it.
Yeah, 100%. I do too. I think he's going to be the top receiver on this team. But like you said, you can't get in front of anybody, a player and their money, especially like Brandon Ayuk, who's going for his first actual contract extension. Unlike Debo, he's already had one, but Debo knows what it takes, so he's also trying to get his money too. So it's going to be interesting. You touched on it. Interesting take. You said, hopefully, I think all Niner fans would love to have them both, but it may ultimately come down to the bottom line, the numbers, and they may only be able to keep one guy next year. We'll see. I mean, again, it does make sense to keep Brandon Ayuk, as you mentioned. The injuries, if you go side to side, you run the tape, tailor the tape between the two players. Obviously, Debo has missed more games, but it's interesting you bring up that second year because, yes, he was in the doghouse. He started a little sluggish. He had an injury coming into that season in training camp. I remember it was the hamstring, and I feel like he got off to a bad start, and that might have mentally kind of threw him up. And that's the thing. When you have injuries, it slows you down a little bit. And that's what kind of happened with Debo over the last couple of years. The year he had before 2021, he came in. Remember, he fractured the foot. He wasn't in shape, so he didn't have that big season. It was the year after where he just was, put himself in the lab. He got himself in the best shape he was, and that's when 2021 came out. So it's going to be interesting. Wide receiver is going to be a fun battle. But, speaking of money, speaking of getting paid, Supreme over here has a great question. He says, when is Bosa getting his contract? And this is something that we should talk about as we're talking into what to look for before training camp. Typically, the 49ers, if you followed the contract situation over the last few years with Debo, as we mentioned, Fred Warner, George Kittle, et cetera, most of their big hitter guys, they get paid right before training camp opens like a day before or a few days before, and then we're all hyped up. Training camp comes, and that's the talk of the first few days. The guy that got paid. Oh, look at Fred Warner. Oh, look at Debo. Oh, look at Kittle. And this year it's going to be, oh, wow, look at Bosa, the whatever $1 million man. So I feel he's going to get paid pretty close to training camp. He says he's not worried. In his press conference a week or so ago, he says he knows he's going to get what he believes he's worth. I think they'll take care of it, like I said, right before training camp. Now, the $1 million question, Rohan, is how much is he worth? How much is he going to get paid? What do you think that Nicholas John Bosa, how much is he worth?
This is a very interesting question. And I'm going to say something that I don't know if many people will resonate with because obviously of the stature of the player.
Hmm.
I think with the number of contract extensions the 49ers have done, backtracking, we're talking George Kittle, Fred Warner, Trent Williams, um, uh, Debo Samuel, whoever else, Ark Armstead, all of these contract extensions, I think this is the one that I'm the least worried about,
Hmm.
which is interesting. Why do I say that? Because in every other contract negotiation, the 49ers were competing with another player to try and get a contract negotiation done. I know it necessarily wasn't necessarily there in the Kittle year, like right there, but that was a nasty negotiation. That was a nasty negotiation that
Yeah.
a lot of people don't really understand. That one was tough. Warner was competing with Darius Leonard of the Colts. 49ers beat the Colts to it. Leonard got about $6 more million on that deal. And then obviously, I mean, the big ones were Trent Williams. We heard how that one went to the last second, and that one was tougher because he was going to be a free agent. And so that makes it a little different, because there were other suitors there. Um, and then obviously Ark Armstead, DeForest Buckner, you had all that drama there. And then the last one is Debo Samuel, and he was competing with four other receivers essentially. And this is also in the offseason where the wide receiver market really, really took off. And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, I'm not as worried because Bosa, there really isn't much to like. There isn't a certain guy you're competing with. The market's been set. TJ Watt has been paid. Myles Garrett has been paid. And those are the two guys that Bosa has been compared to. Now, that doesn't mean that this contract isn't going to be expensive. This one's going to be expensive. And again, I'm not necessarily too worried about the AAV, average annual value. I don't care how much he makes a year. I care about the guaranteed money and the
Mm-hmm.
signing bonus and the numbers like that, guaranteed money at signing. And if you look at numbers overall in terms of the edge market, remember back in, I believe it was 2018 or 2019, whenever Joey Bosa got his contract, he reset the market significantly. There
Mm-hmm.
was the contract before that in terms of guaranteed money was at $62 million. Bosa got a 5-year, $135 million deal and got $78 million guaranteed at signing, a huge $16 million jump. You don't see that significant of a jump, right? Ever. And so that kind of money, that's wild. TJ Watt eclipsed that this past offseason or two off seasons ago. When he got 80 million guaranteed at signing, although that was his full guarantee in a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
Now, if you expect Bosa to get a 5-year deal, you'd expect it to be somewhere in that $150 million range annually. But the
Yep.
biggest thing is how much guaranteed money does that bring? I think that it would eclipse the $80 million mark, somewhere probably in the $85 million mark to begin with after TJ Watt got $80 million, which is wild because the 49ers are essentially guaranteeing Nick Bosa 3 years of his deal. I wonder how big the signing bonus will be as well. And I do wonder like the numbers behind it because his cap hit will go down. It's not going to be at 17 million this year. It'll go down to a number a little more fair after because you understand the first year that base number can be lowered a little bit. So it might go down to maybe 10 million. And the 49ers have space, obviously. They can keep it at 17 if they want. But the big numbers, how much is he getting? He I think guaranteed at signing he's going to eclipse the market for that. And this might be, yeah, the biggest deal for a non quarterback that we've seen thus far in history. Although it seems right now there isn't much to worry about. I think both sides understand they'll get it done. Bosa, obviously, he isn't even worrying about the deal. He's just practicing as if he's going about his business. He works out in Florida mainly anyway. He didn't really miss. You don't care if Bosa misses minicamp. So yeah, I think that this is a good sign for Bosa and the Niners. Obviously, that him not really caring about it right now. But as for when it gets done, would expect around training camp. That's when and I know a lot of people ask, why doesn't it get done earlier? Well, a couple of factors. One is when there's competition with other teams or other players. Players obviously want to wait, make sure they get the best deal. That normally happens last. But second, you this is a huge contract negotiation. You never start at the same spot because let's say the team offers what the player is initially asking for, they're going to ask for more than
Hmm.
understanding that the team is that's their low point. So it starts from low offers from both sides, low and high, and then you obviously meet to the middle until you finally reach that impasse. The reason they sporadically happen during train or right before training camp is because teams understand and players understand there's a deadline. They want to get on the field, so they'll essentially reach a resolve right before then. Wouldn't expect it too much earlier before then, but that's when I'm expecting it. And wouldn't be surprised with 49ers if they are working the phone simultaneously in free agency, understanding the amount of money that they could free up.
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna dovetail off that in a minute, but yeah, going to recap on Nick Bosa, I agree with you. I'm not even worried. I'm not at the slightest, and I think you hit it right on the head. Is there really isn't no competition in his signing? Last year Debo, like you said, there was Terry McLaurin, AJ Brown, Hollywood Brown. There was so many receivers on the market, and and every week was like they gotta pay him, otherwise his price is gonna go up. And Debo knew that because he was like, well, look at the season I just had. I want my price to go up, and his agent represented every single one of those receivers. That was like historical to me. That was crazy. Like shout out to the agent. He got every single one of those guys paid like astronomically. That was amazing. In terms of contract negotiation, that was wild. But you're right, Nick Bosa. There's really nothing to worry about. He knows he's going to go out about his business and get paid because the team loves him. They value him. He's their cornerstone player. And as far as the contract, yeah, I mean those contracts don't just take they don't work them out overnight. It's a long drawn out process, as you kind of mentioned to Kittle. That if you guys know like the behind the scenes on that one, that was a murderer's row contract. Like oh man, reading the stories about that whole contract situation, I'm surprised they even figured it out at the end. It was like nasty. It's like so nasty, man. The agent and the back and forth, Parag and the penny pinching and this and that, and it was like, just, oh man, it's crazy. But yeah, I have no worries about Bosa. I think he will set the market, like you said. I agree. I think he's probably getting paid 85 million guaranteed. Team Money says he's getting 90 million guaranteed. That would be wild. I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised because you never know. Nick Bosa definitely is going to reset the market though, like his brother did. And he just, like you said, goes about his business. He trains in Florida. He has a strict regimen, very disciplined. Kyle came in, said, "How's your summer?" He says, "It's good. I've been on a boat and working out." They don't need him at minicamp. He'll be ready to roll for training camp. I do like what you said about with this extension is they're going to have a little bit more money. Obviously, with an extension, you free up a little cap space. So that brings me to the next question: is okay. This is something a lot of people have talked about. Can they get another veteran pass rusher? We've seen Leonard Floyd now. We've seen Frank Clark over the last week. Those two guys signed, and they weren't big contracts. They were kind of a steal. Less than 10 million. They were 1 year prove it deals for veteran edge rushers. Obviously, the 49ers, they're expecting a lot for Drake Jackson in year two. They don't have, a huge name. They got Clellan Farrell, who could probably replace Ebikam or Amenahu. Then you got some other guys, some filler guys on the roster where I feel like they still can go after another edge rusher. Right? There's a few guys out there. Somebody in the comments said maybe they can go and trade for Chase Young. That definitely is a possibility. He's on the market. But what do you think? Who could they probably get, and what would they likely spend? If they are going to, extend Bosa, they're going to free up a little bit of cap space. They got about 10 right now, roughly. Who can they go and get if they free up some cap space? And you think they are going to do it? So, give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and if they, I mean, first of all, I want to point this out. They already have cap space. They have 10 million in cap space right now. It's not like they're in dire need of cap space. And there are a couple of things that the 49ers like to do. One, they could keep the money for a midseason acquisition because
Mm,
remember, Midseason acquisitions are a lot different than trades in the offseason. Why? Because teams don't have cap space in during the season. So you often see a team trading a player, eat money, and then they get better draft capital in return. A clear example: the Rams traded for Von Miller, the in I believe in 2021 when they went for the Super Bowl. The Rams, though, instead of trading maybe two mid-round picks, they traded a second and a third-round pick because the Broncos ate the entirety of Von Miller's $10 million salary there. And so to me, I think that they could save it for a midseason acquisition where they could eat some of the money in that deal and not necessarily have to give up as much draft compensation should they want to do that. It's an insurance thing. The other thing, injury. Wait for if a 49ers and injuries, they've happened a lot. You wait for that injury to occur, and then essentially you can use that money to sign a backup. I like this question here because it leads to the third scenario. You don't think that they're going to roll over the money due to the Brandon Ayuk deal? Unfortunately, the 49ers just haven't gotten the chance to roll over money much recently. They haven't rolled over too much money. This would be the most ideal scenario. Rolling over the money. Why? Because you get 10 extra million in cap space next year. And it's not that they need it for the Ayuk deal, because the Ayuk deal, again, he was a guy on a 5th-year option. You likely can decrease that cap hit and get even more money when you extend Ayuk next offseason because he'll be on that first year of his deal. So I don't think that I don't think it's necessarily for that, but it's more so keeping space so that you can keep more of your core guys, because not only does Ayuk get a new deal, but all the guys currently on extensions, those cap hits go up by a few million every single year. And so when you have 7 guys on max contracts or high level contracts and the cap hits going up 2 to 3 million, that's 15 extra million that you're essentially losing from the year past in terms of, specifically in terms of cap space and cap hits. And so they could roll over the money. I don't know if that's the most logical thing just based on their past, but it would be the most ideal scenario. But to answer your question overall, after going through the scenarios, who could they get? And we're talking about free agency right now because
Mhm.
there are a couple of free agents I think the 49ers could be interested in. And you immediately got to go to the market that slowly players are going off. And that's the edge market. The 49ers obviously didn't dabble into the edge market that much this offseason. Instead, went for a defensive tackle. They got Javon Hargrave, a massive 4-year, $84 million deal. And that was their big signing. But instead of going after an edge to replace Samson Ebukam or Charles Omenihu, they signed mainly depth pieces. Cleveland Farrell's a guy like that. Austin Bryant, I don't know if he makes the 53, but he's a guy like that. Right now, you really have Bosa, Jackson, Drake Jackson, that is, and Cleveland Farrell. Those are the 3 guys that I believe are locks to make the 53, just based on the money and based on draft status and things like that. But apart from that, I don't think that there are many people like that are locks to make the 53, and that's where you have your money. If Drake Jackson isn't the guy who you believe he is right now, or you think that he worked better in a timeshare kind of role rather than being that full-time defensive end, you can go out and get an edge, and there are a lot of names available. Yannick Ngakoue is the main fish. He's primarily a pass rusher, not really a great run defender. He can be used in a situational role. He's just 28 years old, and I think the biggest holdup with these guys is they're waiting for multi-year deals, hoping
Mhm.
that a multi-year deal can come. The first 2 off the board, Leonard Floyd, I believe he went to the Bills, and then we just saw another deal with the Broncos recently. They were both 1-year deals in Leonard Floyd and Frank Clark. Guys might be waiting for 2-year deals or might be waiting for more incentive guys deals, understanding they can wait till training camp. But some names, Ngakwe's there. Another guy, Dewan Smoot, he's a younger guy from Jacksonville. And then a couple of other guys, Al-Quadin Muhammad, guy who started for Chicago last year, Melvin Ingram, Justin Houston, or some of the older guys, even Robert Quinn's one of the older guys. And if you want a run specialist, Jadeveon Clowney is obviously there, and he's a guy who seems like he wants to win. A lot of names, albeit some of the older names in this edge market right now.
Yeah, no, there's still some good talent out there. Like you said, Yannick. I mean, that would be the prize of the free agent market. But I think you're right. I think he's looking for a multi-year deal. But at this point, training camp's around the corner. You got to take what you can get and parlay that 1-year deal into a multi-year deal next year. Kind of a prove it type of deal. When you got a guy like Chris Kosuric, you would probably, if I'm one of these guys, I would take it, bank on it, let him show me that, let him get me paid. Look at how many guys he's gotten paid over the last couple of years with the 49ers. Arden Key, prime example. The guy was kind of a bust, if you will, right? And now he's getting paid pretty solid out in Jacksonville. So shout out to Zurich. I think if we get a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, who I mean, he never lived up to his draft hype, but the guy could probably come in and be a very, very solid player with the 49ers. So you never know. We'll see. I agree with you. I don't think that money that they're going to have extra laying over after Bosa and even right now is for Ayuk. I think they're going to wait and take care of that next year, with whatever they have left and figure that whole because that's a whole other situation. That's another contract negotiation. We got to see how he does this year.
While Raj comes back, yeah, I mean, that's something that he's right. We've got to see and wait till he comes this year. There you are. But he's right. We got to see, wait till he comes this year. And specifically on Drake Jackson, we've heard nothing but good remarks thus far from Drake Jackson about what the 49ers should expect. He was talked about heavily in the early portion of the offseason. John Lynch, and even when Steve Wilkes came around, he talked about how he's been in the building, he's working, looking to get bigger. And with the 49ers, you have to wait and see the product because it might not always, whatever they say might not always come to fruition when you actually come and see them live, come OTAs, minicamp, or whatever. Jackson looks bigger. He looks the part right now, which is the biggest part. He's up to 265 pounds, he said, and is looking to get bigger, up from 252 last year. And that weight was a big issue last year because, it wore him down as the season went on and led to him being an inactive. And so it's cool to see he's bulking up. Will help him in that run defense kind of role as a rush defending edge and all. But overall, looking to see what Drake Jackson can do in this defense, but also how big of a role can he take on from the 49ers? That's the huge question that I'm really looking forward to when we see him back on the field in about 40 days. How big of a role can Drake Jackson take on? Because if it's a bigger role, you don't necessarily need to spend that money. If it's a smaller role, then you might need to spend that money and effectively utilize a timeshare somewhere.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. A little people have been blowing me up. This like worst time, I guess, to pick a time to stream today. But any case, what was I gonna say? So yeah, Drake Jackson, the guy looks absolutely beefed up, like Polish says. I've seen him up close personal over the last couple weeks. He's been working his butt off, so you could tell he's been really fixing himself. But I still think, like you said, there's only three lots at edge. You gotta get another guy. Justin Houston, go give me a Justin Houston, be a solid veteran. But we'll see. I mean, you never know who steps in and takes that next role. You never know. Maybe Beal, the guy they drafted, can be a solid rotationary player. So it's going to be interesting. Training camp's going to be fun. That's what it's all about, seeing the battles. Speaking of battles, there's one battle that I don't think is being talked about enough right now, but during training camp, it's going to be wild and crazy. The cornerback depth, actually, this year, to me, it looks phenomenal out there. And it's kind of a nice change in a nice change of direction because the last couple of years it wasn't like that. We had Drake Kirkpatrick, we had Josh Norman, and we were pulling our hair out on game days. Now we got a lot of cornerbacks. You got Diamador Lenore looking to break out. You got Mooney Ward. Obviously, he was the big free agent last year. You got two guys that could be solid duo. I know they lost Mosley, but I think Diamador Lenore, who stepped in for his place last year, can really become a solid number two cornerback. And then you have Oliver, who they brought in to be that nickel cornerback. I feel like he's going to take over that role that K1 left that was kind of missing last year. Then you got a lot of other players that they have on this team. Luther, they got, Hartsfeld, and then you got the safeties, Gibson and Hufunga, and then Brown, who you drafted with their first pick in the draft. So to me, secondary is going to be fun, but there's some other guys, Ambry Thomas. This is the last chance for him to really showcase that he can make it to this roster. So 53-man roster is going to be tough to crack if you're a cornerback. I'm excited because there's some other guys I didn't even mention that are going to be out there working their butts off, in terms of secondary. So I'm excited. I know we lost some players, Jimmy Ward, a veteran, but I like what Tashawn Gibson brings to the table. I think Brown's going to be really solid. Early on, he might have to really, harness himself and find a role in this defense. But you got Steve Wilkes. He's a defensive backs guy. I don't know, man. I'm really excited to see what these young cornerbacks are looking like.
Corners are
Dan
interesting.
Womack. I forgot. I
Yeah,
didn't even mention.
corners are definitely interesting. I think that when you look at the starting group, it's not necessarily 100% confirmed, but it essentially is in the way that words were being used. You've got Lenore on the outside, and he'll complement Treverius Ward just like last year. Oliver, it seems like when Steve Wilkes talked, he said when Ward was gone, Jimmy Ward, that is, when he left in free agency, they wanted to get the best nickel on the board, and that was Isaiah Oliver. Pretty high praise. Seems like he's locked into that nickel role, but you've got some really good depth, right? And it's not necessarily really good depth, but really competitive depth in that you have Ambry Thomas, who seems like might be a little higher than initially anticipated. You've got him, you've got Diambro Lenore, sorry, not Diambro Lenore, Samuel Womack, and then you've got Darrell Luter. That's six guys there. I don't know if they carry six guys. They likely might only carry five guys, which might lead to a competition on the back end. But an important thing to note about the corners, something that we didn't really talk about last year, just based on because of the smooth transition and the importance of it with the amount of injuries that were faced, there wasn't really like a solidified player at the positions for the entire year. Lenore had to move from the inside to the outside. Well, he initially was on the outside in camp, moved
Mhm.
to the inside in the last week, and then moved back to the outside in week 6, essentially after Mosley tore the ACL in week 5. Also Verrett injured, right? And that might have prompted a little bit. We don't know what went on in practice there. Were they playing him on the outside? How is that going along? And then also Jimmy Ward, right? He was the nickelback, but he was initially supposed to be a safety, then got moved down to nickelback and played there. This year, it seems like we've got some continuity. Lenore, a full like half year or 2/3 of the year down under his belt at the outside position, and it seems like a lot better, a lot more confident. Spoke about it with NBC's Matt Mayoko the other day. I saw on a podcast where he talked about his growth, really what changed the mentality switch from year 1 to year 2 that allowed him to play like he did last year. And it seems like his confidence level is pretty high right now, and he's gonna have some continuity. And then at the nickel spot, you've got Isaiah Oliver, a player who, while he hasn't been in the system, he's played nickel the last 2 years, which were much better than his first 3 years in the NFL. Wasn't a great player in his first few years. Struggled a little bit on the outside, moved to the nickel, seemed to be a lot more comfortable in the nickel. And that's the role he plays with the 49ers, and he might fit the mold of what Steve Wilkes wants to do with his aggressive scheme. So seems interesting in terms of the continuity with the starters. With the backups, though, you're right. Darrell Luter, he's a guy who's in there. And then obviously Ambry Thomas and Sam Womack. Everybody has flashed a little bit. You talk about Womack. He was a guy who they were really high on last year. And he was the starter
Yeah.
coming out of camp at the nickel position. Obviously, phased out a little bit, and he's more of an inside outside guy. But you know, got to build that frame a little bit. Got to work at the ball a little bit better. But long arms, he's prototypical. And the big thing is he played special teams last year. That's important for that backup cornerback spot, and he played special teams pretty well last year for the 49ers. Terrell Luter, we'll see what he can do, but had a couple of moments in minicamp and OTAs thus far, and also how is his special teams ability? That's a question. But Ambry Thomas seems like a little bit on the uptrend. We'll see if he can save himself a roster spot. Right now, seems like on the outside looking in, but he's another guy. Will be a fun battle between those three at the end.
Yeah, no, I agree with Womack, man. That guy, me and you, we were at training camp last year, and I just remember, I don't know, there was so many times I was like, oh, Womack made a play. Like he stuck out pretty good to me last year. So hopefully he can continue to do that this year, so he can, find a role on this team. But you're right, special teams goes a long way, especially for the younger players, the rookies. I think that's kind of where they need to carve their role, and then eventually they work their way up. And that's the thing. This team is more of like a developmental team. It's not just you're going to be a starter unless you're a Nick Bosa type guy. Some of these guys, they work their way up from the bottom to the top. So good to see. I love to see that kind of development. It's fun. You don't really see this in many teams in the league. Most of these teams, they'll go buy a player, they'll go rent a player, they'll trade for a player. The Niners build through the draft, man, and it's special. So good to see some of these younger guys step up, just like Hufunga last year. I mean, the guy was special teams that first year. He came in spot starts or a couple reps here and there, and then second year it was like, all right, I'm starting, and he became an all pro. So it's just amazing what they do with this team in terms of development. Now, in terms of development, we also got to talk about the offensive line because there's a lot of younger players on that side of the ball too. We've talked about players that are expected to do good. On the offensive line, we got Aaron Banks, year 3 coming in now, really year 2 because his first year was a redshirt. Spencer Burford last year, solid. Both of those guys expected to be starters, and I think they're going to be, 2 starting guards for many years to come. I think they're going to have a big season. You got Trent Williams. How many more years we got Trent for? Maybe 1 or 2. Who knows? Jake Brendel, he did good last year, better than I ever thought he would have been, and he became our starting center. Got paid for it. They have lost a few players. Obviously, the big one, Mike McGlinchey, and they replaced him with Colton McKivitz. That's the big question for most people coming into training camp. Can Colton McKivitz be better than Mike McGlinchey? Depending on who you ask, they'll give you a different answer. Um, and then really the depth. We lose Brunskill. He's the Swiss Army knife. Who's going to replace that role? I think Feliciano is a guy that could really challenge for that role. But he wants to start. But you got Spencer Burford. Really, it's his job to lose. So then you got Zakel, Poe. A lot of younger players. You got Jalen Moore. So I feel like this depth of this offensive line, this is a critical year for them to develop and showcase that they could be solid players, especially if they have to come in on a you know injury or whatever the case is, because that was the issue. Is that's kind of hampered this team. Is the starting line's usually pretty good, but it's the backups. Can they come in if they have to and be a very good starter in limited time whenever something happens? Again, Trent Williams, love the guy, but he is getting older, and there's a few times through the season where he misses games because he plays so physical. The guy's just a monster. So they got to have good depth, and that I feel like is what's really going to be important for this group specifically in training camp. And then is there going to be a gem that kind of sticks out that you're like, holy smokes, where was this guy all along? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the offensive line? Do you think Colton McKivitz is going to be, a really solid starter? I think people are saying he's kind of standing out. He's gotten good reviews so far in training camp. Obviously, no pads on and anything, so it's hard to really critique an offensive lineman. We'll see what happens in training camp. But, what are your expectations for him? Obviously, Mike McGlinchey is a very polarizing player for the 49ers. A lot of penalties. People hated him. But he was a good run blocker, right? Pass protection was something that he struggled in at times. So if Colton McKivitz is a better pass protector, are we good? Like, what's your thought on the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about McKivitz, we talk about the entire offensive line. I think it's going to be a solid year. Last year, I said this would be a top 15, top 12 offensive line at worst if Mike McGlinchey was healthy to begin the season because he had the torn quadricep.
Yeah.
He was healthy. 49ers, I thought, finished in the top 10 last year, and this was again at a time where a lot of people coming out of that camp time when there were some offensive line struggles were saying, nah, this unit not looking that great. But I expect a bump up from Banks, expect a bump up from Burford. Continuity is there with that first four. And I mean, McKivitz has also been there. He's spot started. It's now just can you develop consistency over a 17-game season? My biggest question is with you. It's the depth. Number one, I'm not looking at the interior. I'm looking at tackle.
Mm.
Who can be the backup tackle? McKivitz has played in spot duty, and he's played fine in spot duty before. I don't think there's a good spot tackle, though, on this team right now. You're talking about Leroy Watson. I'm not that confident in. He's a guy who's still bulking up, a guy who was a developmental tight end transformed into an offensive lineman. Jalen Moore, not that confident in at tackle. I prefer him at guard. 49ers won't play him at guard. They played him once at guard. He was a first-team guy at guard, and then they bumped him back to tackle due to injuries and things last offseason. And so I'm not confident in him at tackle. And the other guys, Matt Pryor, wasn't good at tackle when he played with the Colts last year. So I'm not confident in any of the options at backup tackle. Could that be an area where the 49ers spend some money this offseason before the season starts? There are some tackles available. I know George Fant's available from the Jets, familiar with the system. Not necessarily as confident on the player, but familiar with the system. There are a couple of options available. That could be a thing. But also in regards to the starting offensive line, you pointed it out. The biggest question is Colton McKivitz. How does the guy play, both in pass protection and run blocking? Seems like he might be a better pass protector than McGlinchey, although I'm not sure at the moment. He's going to be a worse run blocker for sure. That was McGlinchey's bread and butter. How does it impact the offense? Because in the past, the 49ers have gotten away with below average right tackle play at times, especially when McGlinchey was injured. But can they do it over a 17-game season? That's the big question. And again, it's not only about the regular season. can they do it in the playoffs too?
Mhm.
Because when we remember in 2021, when Tom Compton was a starter for the 49ers, or yeah, I believe it was 21 when Compton was a starter for the 49ers after McGlinchey had the injury. He was getting killed in the playoffs by the Rams in that game, in the NFC Championship game, and he wasn't that great in the playoffs overall. Can the 49ers have sustainability on that right side in the playoffs as well? Those are some questions I'm looking to see answered. Although overall, I still expect this unit to be a top 15 unit, definitely at worst this offseason, probably inching closer to that top 10 mark that they earned last year.
Yeah, no, I could see them being a top 10 unit. Again, just like you said, it's the depth that I'm worried about. And that's a good point. Maybe the money that they have, that they can utilize could be more well spent on a pass protector, on an offensive lineman. Yeah, that's a good point. We get hung up on the edge rushers, but that's just as important, making sure that the quarterbacks don't get hurt, right? The one topic that most of us spend an entire offseason talking about, we want to make sure that whoever it is stays healthy. So I agree. Maybe go get some depth in the free agent market. And one thing you mentioned earlier that I want to kind of go back to, you mentioned mid-season moves. That's the thing is the 49ers over the last couple of years, they kind of make these mid-season moves over instead of worrying about stuff at the beginning of the season, because it's really hard to see what you're going to need as the season progresses. Maybe you find yourself 3-5 record and you're like, okay, what do we need to jolt this team? Last year was CMC, right? They've done it a couple years back with Emmanuel Sanders, and maybe this year they wait it out. Midseason comes and like, okay, we really screwed the ball here with McKivitz or one of these guys. We need some extra, pass protection. We'll go get an offensive lineman. So you never know. Maybe that could be the midseason move. I think they're gonna roll with who they have because a lot of those guys are young, still developing. Burford and Banks, they're still pretty young. They're only in their second and third year respectively. So and McKivitz, he's been in the league for a few years. It's not like he's 30, 40 years old out there. He's really, this is his first year as a starter. Jake Brendel last year, this was his first year as a starter, and he played pretty well over he took his time. They let him kind of come in and learn the ropes, although he was a journeyman before that. But that's what the 49ers do. Again, they develop talent. So I think they like to see what they have with their finished product before they make a rash decision. But if they find themselves 3-5, and that's the issue, they'll figure it out because they do not need to be 3-5. Whatever it is, I hope they don't start slowly this year because I think they need to get that number one seed. Hopefully, they got off to a good start. I want to see them 6-0, 7-1, something like that to start the season because if they're playing on the road again, it's going to be a tough playoff battle. It's just easier when you're at home. You don't have to travel. You have your home field advantage. You got the faithful. You got Rohan out there at the games. We need it, man. We need all of us at the games. Um,
I mean,
but
that's a
yeah,
good point. That travel at the end of the year, it's excruciating. Doing it for 3 consecutive weeks, especially. And, the 49ers, they had a little bit of a break last year, right? Where a division winner, I believe, yeah, ended up getting the 2 seed. So they got 2 home games. You don't travel for 2 straight weeks.
yeah,
2021, you had to travel, I think it was 4 straight weeks because you had a week 18 against the Rams and then
yeah.
3 straight road games in the playoffs. And so it's tough for sure to do that. That 1 seed is very valuable. And the biggest way to get it is what you pointed out, that early start, because the 49ers have a better early season schedule
Mhm.
compared to the late season schedule. Consequently, however, they haven't performed as well early season compared to late season later on.
Yeah, I agree. It's monumental to get a good start, but their schedule bodes well early in the season. A little tough, like you said, towards the end. We'll see how the rest of the teams go, but I mean, they were just so tired last year towards the end of the season, and going back to the year previously, 2021, when they were on the road for every playoff game. I mean, I traveled to those games. I was tired. I didn't even play any games. I just from traveling. I can only imagine how the Niners were. They had to play, playoff football and travel. So let's hope that they get off to a hot start. I got a question for you, Rohan. It's from Peter Parker. He says, "Do you think Trey lights it up during training camp? What do you think? You think Trey Lance is gonna tear it up during training camp and wow everybody, knock the socks off? What do you think?"
This is a big question, right? Because we haven't really seen Trey Lance in training camp that much. First off season's obviously the first off season, a raw prospect, but he was competing with Jimmy Garoppolo a little bit. He was pushing him a little bit. We saw in the open practices. Training camp number 2, he was just given the reins, fully given the reins. Not a chance he was going to be not going to be the starter to start the year, and he was uneven. He was inconsistent. and had accuracy issues. A lot of good flashes, but a lot of flashes of a young quarterback. This is his most crucial training camp for sure. Right now, based on what reports we've gotten thus far, seems like it's again a little bit inconsistent, right? Good flashes, I'm assuming I'm expecting him to keep his distance from Sam Darnold and expect him to take over as the quarterback, the favorable quarterback of the bunch. But he needs to light it up for him to have a shot with Brock Purdy. And I've said on stream as well that I believe if Brock Purdy returns and is able to suit up for week one, I don't think there's a chance he loses his job. The only way that a quarterback, like the reason the 49ers are saying there can be a competition and the job is up for grabs is in the case that Purdy isn't healthy, you've got a chance to prove in real life, in real game action, that you can be the guy. That's the only way I think Lance can win the starting job. And I think that there's still a good possibility. I've pegged that Lance will still be the week one starter, despite the recent reports. I don't think the 49ers rush Purdy back at the moment, but I hope he lights it up for his own sake, given the way that his career's gone so far. Right now, though, I'm expecting a little more of the inconsistencies, although more brighter moments than last offseason to compile all together with the added work that he's done.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's going to have a better training camp than he was last year. Last year really was his first, you know, full foray as becoming the quarterback one, in all intents and purposes. We all kind of had that feeling he was going to be the guy, and it wasn't perfect. He had his ups and downs. I think you're going to see similar stuff this year, maybe more ups than downs. I mean, he's still raw, he hasn't had a lot of experience, but I feel like maybe also with Purdy being there, it's just going to have everybody on their P's and Q's, and if Purdy's out there and he's ready to roll week one, they've already said he's pretty much the guy. But at the same time, they want to make sure he's 100% ready. They don't want to rush it. So this does give Trey an opportunity to, like you said, if he goes out there and he just lights it up, and you're like, okay, man, we can at least keep Purdy on the back burner for 3 weeks. We know we can win some games with Trey. So this is a big one. This is a big one for Trey. This is a big one for the whole 49er team because they got a roster that's just so star studded. They just need to make sure they, like you said, get out of the gates and win games. Can Trey win you games early off the blocks? He hasn't had a lot of experience. He's 2-2 as a starter. A lot of people wrote him off, but he just wants to compete, like he said, and it's gonna be a fun training camp in terms of quarterback. There's gonna be a lot of crazy reports. There's gonna people be overreacting. At the end of the day, the people that know if he's capable are the coaches, and then that's who we have to trust. And then you got the wild card, Sam Darnold. We'll see what he can do. A lot of people think that with the 49ers offense that he might be able to resurrect his career or turn it around or whatnot. So it's going to be interesting. I think Brock Purdy will probably be healthy to start the season. And I think, all of this offseason talk is just going to be talk. And I think Brock's going to be our week one starter. Now, let's hope he can stay healthy because that's when the drama will hit if Brock's not healthy, and then who the hell is going to replace him? That's to me that's when it would get very interesting. Right now, I think it's pretty cut and dry. As long as Brock doesn't have any setbacks and he's healthy 100%, I don't think there's much of a story. It's if he gets hurt or he has a setback or he's not ready to play, that's when we have a big story. So we'll see. I'm gonna let it play out.
Yeah,
Whoever's the quarterback is the quarterback. I just want him to win games, man. Because like I said, I want them
exactly.
to a hot start into the season. Speaking of the season, Rohan, what's your record prediction? I know it's still early. I know the training camp hasn't started, but you've seen the schedule. What do you got? A little early record prediction. What do you think?
I've done a record prediction, I believe the last 2 years when the schedule came out. This year though, I forget exactly what I was doing or I was in school, I believe, when the schedule dropped. So I didn't do a schedule I didn't do a scheduled live stream or anything like that. I haven't done a significant record prediction at all. So if we look at the schedule overall with the 49ers, I think that this one's going to be interesting because like I pointed out, I think their early game schedule is a little easier than their later year schedule, excuse me. However, 49ers haven't always been as good in the early portion of the year. But if I were to predict a record, I would go along the lines of similar to last year in the 11-6 range, 11-6, 12-5 range. That's where I'm heading. I think the 49ers will drop a game that is unexpected, but once they get into a groove midseason, by the midseason point, I expect their quarterback situation and all to be figured out.
Mhm.
I expect it to be figured out before then, but I think they'll be in a full groove by that point, and I think that they'll be able to beat some tougher opponents. And you look at that late season schedule, their toughest stretch is when they face Seattle on the road on Thursday night in Week 12, go to face the Eagles at the Link in Week 13, and then come back to face the Seahawks at home in Week 14. That weeks 12 to 14 is a really crucial point. You see the Ravens 2 weeks later at home on Christmas Day. A lot of crucial games in that stretch.
Yeah, that's going to be a rough stretch. I mean, that could really kind of determine the NFC right there. You got 2 games against Seattle. That's the division most likely. I think Niners and Seattle are going to be the top 2 teams in the NFC West, and the Eagles. It's going to be Niners and Eagles. I honestly think that little stretch of games will be what determines the NFC. As long as the Niners can get off to a hot start to start the season, because I think the Eagles are too. And then you got the Ravens. That's a tough game on Christmas. I'll be at that one. I'm not gonna lie. That's a tough game. The birds usually aren't. They don't bode well for the 49ers sometimes historically. Birds and the Niners, we always got some issues with the bird team. So hopefully this year we can make that bird gauntlet and take care of business. But like you said, it really starts with making sure the quarterback situation is figured out and it's stabilized. And hopefully by that point of the season, it's nice and ready and we're on a roll. But I think this defense is going to be very, very instrumental in winning a lot of games, as they always are. This defense is so good, man. So, and then you got the guy named CMC, who we haven't even talked about today, who this is his first year with the 49ers, first full year. This is going to be his first full year as a member of the 49ers. Last year, he came in midseason. Yeah, it's going to be scary to see what this offense can be with him through the whole season, and the guy's just work ethic is amazing. I don't know, man. I think this team can win 12 to 13 games. That's kind of what I had it as. Because again, I feel like there's a lot of winnable games early on this season, and you might take a few L's here and there. I mean, there's always some losses that you're just scratching your head and you're going, how did they lose that? But overall, I think the Niners should be able to win 12 to 13 games, and hopefully that's good enough for the number one seed. So we'll see, man. I'm excited. Training camp next month. I'll be there. You'll be there. Trey Lance will be there. Everybody's gonna be there. It's gonna be fun, man.
Yeah, I agree, man. It'll be fun. It'll be a fun time, and excited to see how it goes. Excited to see how this training camp goes. Excited to see how it all goes.
Yeah, yeah. Any big prediction? Or so before we end it up here, any big predictions for training camp? Breakout players? Who's your breakout player on offense and defense coming in? Maybe just training camp or into the season. That somebody's gonna have a huge training camp and then carry it into the season. Who's that guy for you?
Two guys pop in my mind. They're the two guys that I've talked about as breakout players thus far, and I think they can continue to improve on their performance. Defensively, got to go with Jair Brown, a guy who has continuously racked up interceptions, it seems, in the early OTA portion. Talked about it extensively, wrote about it as well in terms of how I think that he can push for a starting job. I don't know how many three safety sets the 49ers will include. This group of safeties is different than before because I thought Jimmy Ward was primed to play that nickel role. He even showed it last year by playing it at an elite level at the end of the year when he was like specifically at that role. But when he was even playing it only for 200 snaps in a year, I thought he played it well, and that allowed for a lot more versatility in that safety room. This year, I'm not that confident in the other options at that big nickel role. And so I think there might not be as many three safety sets as some people may want, which means you got two on the field, and I think Jair Brown's got a chance to potentially push. Offensively, got to go with JP Mason, Jordan Mason. The reason being, I think he's also got a chance to really push Elijah Mitchell for that RB2 role. Already seen Elijah Mitchell accumulate one small injury in OTAs, obviously holding him out as a precaution. But Mason, he showcased some small flashes of pass catching last year. I think the third down ability was the biggest thing. How can he pass catch? How can he pass protect? And if he can improve that pass protection, I think he gets a bigger role because his pass catching seems to have improved this offseason. And that's a big thing because the 49ers, they want similarity. They want continuity when they take McCaffrey off the field. Don't want to eliminate any plays out of their package of plays when they put Mason on. If Mason can do a little bit of the pass catching and kind of play that third down kind of back role as well, I think it increases the opportunity that he could receive, and that also further solidifies himself as a runner because he'll have more opportunities to be a runner where he was dominant with 5.5 yards per carry last year.
No, those are two solid picks. I love Mason. That's one of my breakout guys too. I mean, we saw him come out of nowhere last year. Training camp came, and we were going, "Who's this guy? Undrafted guy? And he makes the roster." Like that's what Kyle Shanahan does. He finds these undrafted running backs, and he just makes them very solid players on his team. There's so many of them through the years with the Niners. You know, Jeff Wilson, Matt Breida. We can go on and on. Like that's it. And Jordan Mason, man, this guy is he runs so hard. I think he's going to be our RB2. I love Elijah Mitchell, but his inability to stay healthy is his downfall. So I agree. I like Jordan Mason, but my two, I'm going to go different with you. So I want to throw some other names out there. I'm going to go defensively. Marcelino McCrary Ball. We haven't heard a lot of him. Maybe if you've been at training camps in preseason, yeah. This guy, I think he's going to take that role that Azeez Al-Shahir left. The guy was a hard hitter. We loved Azeez, but I think McCrary Ball is primed for a nice little breakout season there with the 49ers. I think he's going to win that role. Linebackers, deep. The 49ers drafted a lot of linebackers this year. They have a lot on their roster, but I think McCrary Ball is going to be the guy that takes that role that was left over by Azeez. This guy's just smart. He's physical. He's tough. He's a good, fast linebacker. Lateral speed. He's solid, man. I love this guy. He's just got a lot of energy. So I got McCrary Ball on defense, and then one guy to look out for on offense. I know he's kind of a role player. I think he's gonna have a bigger year this year because he's in a contract year. I like Jawan Jennings a lot this year. We all know he's kind of like that physical, like glue guy. He's the Draymond Green. He just kind of gets under cornerback skin. But I just think that he's going to have a big year because if he doesn't, I don't know if a lot of teams are going to really want to pay him. This is a free agent year for him, basically. Whether he wants to come back to the Niners or test the market next year, it all kind of his money is all going to be determined on this season. So I feel like Jawan Jennings is going to have a really solid year, better than a lot of people think. Because remember when Kendrick Bourne, he went and became a free agent that year before he was a free agent. That was a very good year for him. He was traditionally a third down receiver, but he became one of the better players for the 49ers. I think Jawan Jennings is kind of going to emerge as a kind of a go-to guy for the quarterback, whoever it may be at times. And I think Kyle Shanahan loves him. He's earned a spot on this team because of his blocking and his grittiness, but I think he's going to really kind of break out this year and maybe have 600-700 yards receiving. I don't know. That's what I think. Those two guys right there.
We'll see it, man, because if that happens, I don't know about 600-700 yards, but if that happens, you've got a couple of options, and that's another reliable piece, right? And I could see the motivation, right? Understanding that it's contract year, you can get paid if you play well. You already can block, you receive a little better, you can get paid. Let's see. Hopefully, the number one thing for him, can he drop, or it's funny, can he drop the drop rates?
Yeah.
Drops. Big issue thus far with the hands,
Yeah.
If he can drop that, looking solid.
Yeah, I think if he can hold on to the ball a little bit better, we're good. And got to increase his touchdown rate. If he's really a red zone guy, he may catch some touchdowns in the red zone. So we'll see, man. I'm excited. Anything else you got going on this week? I know you said you've been busy, but what else you got going on this week, Rohan?
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've got live streams. Today with Raj. Tomorrow we'll be with Marco on Clutch Gene Sports, and then Wednesday will likely be with Sunil. So we'll have some fun shows. Hopefully we get something lined up as well for Thursday. But yeah, man, it's a nice week. Another week of 49ers talk, and I'm sure there'll be something that pops up between Monday and Thursday, even though we're in the dead part of the offseason.
Yeah, there's got to be something. They had a second workout with that Jaquez guy, the XFL guy. Maybe they signed him. Maybe we could talk about that. But say what's up to Marco and Sunil for me. As always, it's always good to have you on the show. Faithful, we love you. Appreciate the chat today. That's going to do it for tonight. You guys have a good rest of your week. If I don't see you, go Niners.